in a third grade classroom, there may be in a group of 20 people or 18 people, 3 to 5 different skills or different levels that they're at. Because some are a little bit more advanced than others and some are having a harder time than others. How do we have the teacher teach that many different skill levels without affecting one or the other more adversely, right? And so why are we continuing to teach reading and math based on the grade? Why not put them in the classroom? And so from 9 to 10 every day in that school, this is reading. And wherever your skill level is, now you're lumped with your skill level, not with your grade. There's data that shows that that cities that have done that are hugely successful. And because you're providing more time with those skill sets, you're not having to divide your time. And so I think there's things that we can do to innovate. Government's very bad about innovation. And so you a lot of times you have to think outside the box and you have to do things to look at it. I think there's things that we can do to be successful, but people are going to recoil at first, and then you kind of have to talk it through and work it out.
Cameron Sexton, welcome to the Rutherford County GOP podcast. It's great to have you today.
Glad to be here. Thank y'all.
Yeah, we're blessed today to have the Speaker of the House with us. And Cameron, thank you for joining us. Matt and I have been talking about having you on for some time, so thanks for working with our schedule. And
I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, we just like to kind of start off by talking a little bit about who you are and where you came from. You've served in the General Assembly since 2010, I believe. Is that correct?
Elected in 10, started in 11. Yeah.
Awesome. Very good. Well, tell us a little about yourself, kind of where you're from. I don't dive too deep in a bio because I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share a little bit who you are. That's one of the things about this podcast is we like to kind of tell the story that doesn't often get told about who the people are.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Look, 8th generation Tennessean. We tracked it all the way back to 2 brothers who came across to America back in the day. One went north, one went south. Obviously, I was the one that went south. And and so we have long roots here in Tennessee. My family, my dad's family was from Scott County, Tennessee, Huntsville, Oneida area. My mom's from Southwest Virginia, the Clintwood area. Her father was a coal miner, and my dad's parents were teachers. And so I grew up in Knoxville, went to Oak Ridge High School, where I met Randy McNally, which is an interesting story in itself. Then went to University of Tennessee. I was the 3rd generation. My son, Nathaniel, just graduated about 2 years ago, so he's the 4th generation to graduate from University of Tennessee. Got a job in got a degree in political science. And as I tell people, when I left UT, everybody was looking to hire a political science major. So I had all these job opportunities out there. And so I went looking for something to do and kind of found my way into helping on campaigns and stuff. And that's Randy McNally was the first campaign I ever helped on. And then went back and forth, always have been in sales or business development, depending on whether it was in healthcare or in banking now. Currently live in Crossville, Tennessee. Been there since I started working for Van Hillary back in 1999, whenever he was a congressman. That's how I met Van. And so I've been there ever since for 26 years now. I lived in Crossville.
Crossville's booming these days. It's a growing city for sure.
Well, it's really hard to find a city in the state that's not doing well, and much to do because of your leadership, the General Assembly's leadership, and obviously great leaders at the gubernatorial level the past, decade or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had 2 great Republican governors in Haslam and Governor Lee, who really set us forth. Even Bredesen did a good job on the business side, setting us up and did a lot of things in Oak Ridge that really helped us propel us into this energy sector that we're now leading in. And so we've had a very good run of governors, and I think we're well positioned for the future. There's a couple things that we're going to work on for this next year and a couple of years, hopefully. And that will also put us where we're no longer competing with just states that are in America. We're competing with countries around the world. Tennessee would be.
What was it that first kind of drew you to public service? You mentioned you got a political science.
So whenever I graduated UT, I was trying to find something, and that was in 1994. That was the year of Frist and Thompson and all that, and Sundquist. And so Randy McNally was running for re-election to the state Senate. And so I was looking for something, and so I aligned with him. And when I was in school, I played sports, and so politics seemed a lot like sports. So you kind of have that competition. But the other thing is it kind of takes everything you've learned in life and puts it into one thing, because there's relationship building, there's communication, there's wordsmithing, marketing, advertising. And so it took everything that I learned in the political science world, that the classes I had to take, learn about the economy and everything, and then added the sports concept. And that's really what got me involved into politics, as far as working in it, not running for it, but working in politics.
Yeah, that's great. So you began your legislative career. What was, and I ran in 10, what was kind of the catalyst for you to go from, okay, I've helped, I worked for Randy McNally and Van Hillary, and what was kind of the catalyst for you of like, I think I might want to like run for office instead of being the behind the scenes guy? I want to put myself out there and run for office. What was
so
that like?
in 2010, I would say it was a lot of the locals in Cumberland County were looking to make a change. We had a Republican state representative. If you remember, it was whenever we had just gotten the majority to a certain degree. And so they were looking to put in different election administrators. And, you have to be careful sometimes in a small town. And the election administrator that was there, the person that was in office said they were a Democrat, but when you look at their voting record, they were nonpartisan because they were not supposed to vote in primaries. So this individual never voted. And so one thing led to another, and the elected officials, local elected officials, the business community, and others said, just hold off, let's don't do this yet. And that person said, I'm doing it. I don't care what you say. And so when you see my campaign signs and you see the billboards, that's why we came out with People Before Politics. Because it was solely about politics. It wasn't about the people, because the individual that was running the elections was doing a great job, nonpartisan. And so why would you replace them simply because you could? And so in a small town, that kind of makes a difference. And so people approached and asked me if I would run. Now, I wasn't the first choice. I think I was maybe third or fourth down the list. And so we took a look at it, and we felt like that we could make a hard run at it.
Yeah. And that was kind of, I think 2010 was kind of the Tea Party movement year.
It started in there, about 10 to 12, 13 is about how long it lasted.
Yeah.
So you kind of hit the ground running when you took office. Not long after you were elected, you ended up becoming the majority whip, correct?
Yeah, after the freshman year, yes.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that, because the majority whip in Tennessee looks a little different than maybe what people would think about in Washington. Yeah,
I mean, they're very different. I mean, you may count votes like you do in Washington.
Yep.
But not a lot. Most of the time, you already kind of know what the votes are going to be. You might whip 3 or 4 bills over time. But the majority whip, at least in the caucus here in Tennessee, is more about running the campaigns and making sure that we reelect our members. And whenever I was a whip, we didn't lose a single member, and people thought that we would, because we won a lot of previous Democrat state rep seats. And so what we were able to do when I was whip is actually expand the margin of victory in those areas. And now we've really solidified where we're at in Tennessee.
What did that teach you as you were whip? Because now we have a supermajority now in the Conservative Party. So you certainly did a fantastic job with that. But what did that teach you about leadership and getting consensus on ideas that I think we have seen kind of play out in your time in Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you hire good people and put good people around you, then you're going to be successful. And if you attack the situation and understand what that is, but you also have to understand that each district is different. And so if it's a West Tennessee district, it's vastly different than probably East Tennessee, based on the voter profile, one. Also different between rural, urban, and suburban. And not all issues are the same. And so in some areas, it may be a very conservative issue that's driving it. In other areas, that may not be the issue that you want to drive. So you kind of have to approach it kind of like a business and a marketing plan. And as you're marketing the people, there's different marketing that you do depending on where you are. And I think in politics, sometimes we want to try. And I think that's what we're battling right now, is a lot of people, or not a lot, a minority of people who are on the right side. What they want to do is try to put everybody in the same box. And if you're not in that box, then obviously you're not a Republican, obviously you're not a conservative. But knowing that we need to continue to grow our party is essential to our success long term.
Well, you became a speaker in 19.
Yes.
That was at a critical moment. Glenn Casada had been speaker for a short term, and the party was really looking for somebody to come in and step into that speaker role to really kind of steady the ship, bring a new level of confidence. And I think they picked you out of that
After a
group,
long process, yes. I mean, it was a short time period, but there were a lot of people who were running for that, and I think we were in a caucus meeting for 3 to 4 hours, rolled through 4 or 5 different votes based on how we do it, and then at the end, I was successful, and so I've been speaker since because the caucus continues to support me in that role, and I think we made a big difference in our state in the last 7 years. But I think we did a whole lot with Speaker Harwell in place as well.
What was that experience like? You talk about, because obviously on the national scale, we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years that, the speaker's race essentially play out on national TV. So what was it like for you, especially given the dynamics of the previous speaker and kind of the, let's just call it distrust that had been fostered? How did you convince the caucus that you were the right person to lead?
I mean, it wasn't a race where I don't know what others were saying as they were talking to members, but my race was never about Glenn or about what happened. My thing was about where do we want to go? What's our vision? What do we want to achieve? How do we get more people involved in the process? Because the caucus was somewhat fractured at that time. How do we pull back and how do we move forward out of this to where we can be stronger? That's kind of what we focused on. It seemed like it worked out well in the end. There could have been others who were doing it. And so, I think as you're looking at trying to be a leader, I think a lot of people when you become in the General Assembly, that first year, people are sizing you up already. They're trying to figure out what makes you tick, how do you interact, what's your word mean, and all that plays out over the course of a time period.
Well, I saw you a couple weeks ago at the governor's mansion for a fundraiser that you did, and it made me think a lot. You've been the speaker now 7 years, which, in context, basically the entire time that Governor Lee has been in office, you've been the speaker. And I'm curious to kind of that relationship, because the governor is not inviting everyone to have fundraisers at the mansion. And so I'm just curious. The governor comes in with a high business acumen, but maybe not so high political acumen, whereas you certainly have a very high political acumen. You know how to get things move forward. Tell us a little bit about that relationship, what that was like with you and the governor, kind of coming in initially, and then kind of what it's transitioned over the last 7 years.
As with anything, you have to spend a lot of time with one another to be able to understand each other, right? The same thing with members of the caucus or even some of the Democrat caucus. The longer you serve, the more you talk to them, the more you know, the better feel you have how to interact, right? And so, look, the governor and I have a great relationship. I'm looking forward to continuing when he's not governor and continuing to ask him for advice and touch in with him and see how he's doing and what's going on. But, he is a very unique person. Everybody's unique in their own way. Governor Haslam, I was in leadership for just a little bit of time, never really had to interact with him too much like others. But, I think with Governor Lee is trying to understand his background. He has a very mentoring type of background, very involved in trying to turn people's lives back around, very Christian-based individual who has a heart of gold. And what I tell people all the time is when you understand the governor, it's not about him getting individual success. It's about him trying to help improve our state and other people. But our relationship is strong. And I'm not saying that we agree on every single thing, which is fine. But we do have the capability to sit down and trying to work to a place where we both feel comfortable if we can get to that point and then moving the state forward.
What do you think has changed, since you took the gavel and as speaker? What's changed the most since 2019?
Well, some of the newer generation, they do not like the institution. They don't like the history. They don't like the respect. They don't like the decorum rules. Everything for some of them is nothing but social media, instant gratification, and how can I get more clicks and more of this? And that's really not what serving is. What serving is about is trying to work with others to improve our state, to move us forward, to get us somewhere where we have never achieved. It's not about one single person trying to become a million YouTube follower or something, right? That's not what politics is about. And unfortunately, I think whether it's national or state level, you have individuals who that's their number one concern.
You wouldn't be referencing the Tennessee 3, would you?
There's some of those. Yeah. Look. And what I tell people all the time, I understand if you want to stand up on a House floor and well on a bill. I get it. I understand it. I understand that. But when you start getting into this personal attacks, and you've seen it with the Charlie Kirk, and you've seen it with other, where they start calling you all these different types of names that instills hatred in other people.
It goes beyond politics.
It goes beyond politics, and they're really trying to instigate negativity against individuals. And when you get to that level, we've never seen that before. Even if you go back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you've never seen that before. And so you have a new brand of new people in politics who are trying to divide a wedge into the state or into the United States of America, to the federal government. And we cannot allow them to be successful in that. Both sides of the aisle cannot allow that to happen.
Yeah, it just goes to show, I hear a lot of people say, what difference does it make? We're a supermajority. We're going to get our will passed through no matter what. And you see in that situation where the radical left comes in, and even though they're not in majority, they can create a tremendous amount of chaos. It seems like you do end up spending way more time than you should just managing this chaos that seems to just want to create issues and create turmoil. And I think you've done a beautiful job managing that, but it's constant, and it's just little things, not following quorum and, just basic things. How do you go about managing that in a way that it doesn't become a distraction to keep you from moving the right things forward?
Yeah, I think one is we've learned a lot, right? And so I think we've really learned. Before you're in that situation, you don't know how you're going to handle it. Kind of like in sports, until you play the best team and they whip you, you don't really understand what that's like, right? And how to figure that out. And so our rules were not set up to handle what happened on the House floor. They weren't set up for that because they assumed everybody would act a certain way. And so we've had to go back and change the House rules to set in place what the historical perspective has been in the House of Representatives. Congress does the same thing. Congress is more restrictive than us, and people yell at the Tennessee House because we're putting in things, but we're less restrictive than if you were sitting in Congress in the balcony or on the House floor, what you can and can't do, right? And so sometimes you lose the perspective. The other thing is, if you go into a courtroom and you stand up and you start shouting and yelling and doing the things that some people are doing, they're going to remove you immediately. There's no questions, right? And so there is a level of decorum and respect that's needed, because that's where you can see it in multiple areas. But our rules weren't set up for it. And so we had to go back and revise the rules, I think, two times now to get it to a place where I think we're really well off and being able to handle that so that we can function. Then the other thing is, what you realize then is they're just wanting clicks. And so we just move forward. I think one of the things that you saw during a special session one time, the Democrats are always counting how many members we have on the House floor, because the way that a minority party will work is if they can leave and you're underneath your quorum restrictions, they stop business. Well, they miscalculated, and so they left and they didn't have the number right. And so when they left, that was probably the most swift and successful and efficient session that we had in a long time.
No disruptions.
No disruptions, and a lot of bills were passed. Right.
Well, one of the things interesting, so as you're managing this in Nashville at our capital, we also see it kind of this in Nashville, it's statesmanship and how you do things with honor and integrity and those type of things. When we move out of the state, we see on our college campuses a lot of times where, freedom of conservative speech is not permitted. We just saw the incident at TCU. We've seen just this week a professor at MTSU hosting a forum on
becoming
opposing Christians. Yes.
Yeah.
And becoming ungovernable was the title of it. How do we begin to step outside of our state legislature and begin to regulate, especially these state-funded institutions that we're funding every year, where they are just becoming more and more radicalized and not allowing freedom of speech from the conservative side? How do we begin from a state level? How do we begin to kind of crack down on some of that?
Well, that's a good question, right? I think you do have freedom of speech, but it doesn't mean there's not consequences for what you say. And I think sometimes people think, since I have freedom of speech, I can say anything, you can't do anything to me or hold me accountable. But even the courts will say you can't run into a public building in a theater and yell fire. That's not freedom of speech, right? So there is a basis where people believe there is a limitation, but there's always consequences to it, right? And so I think that one of the things that has really happened is here in Tennessee when Charlie Kirk was assassinated and you had professors popping off, the university said you went too far, there's a consequence. And they started arguing, well, this was my individual capacity. Well, no, but it wasn't in your individual capacity. This was as a professor, XYZ. And so they started terminating him, which sends the right message, right? That there are consequences for certain things that you may say. I think that the second part of that is, look, we need more conservatives to be college professors, to be honest with you. I mean, when it's all the woke left that are the professors, what do you expect, right? Not saying that we can't limit or try to work through that process. But I was talking to colleges all the time around the state of Tennessee, to the college Republicans, and I asked them, how many of y'all are going to be professors? Because you know what? They ask the same questions. And they're there like, how do we handle this? It's like, how many of y'all want to be professors? None of them. They want to go do something else, right? So we also have to understand that if we're going to do this, we need to have Republicans and conservatives who want to be in that profession. That will help us tremendously. At the same time, you have a difference between private and public schools. So public schools, yes, we can have some accountability. We can do stuff on private. There's not much that we can do because there's not much funding. In the state, you have the Hope Scholarship. You have other things there that you could do and try to do if that's what you want to do. But you also have to realize on freedom of speech, if you're going to allow I don't have a problem with them allowing, a left-leaning person to come in if they allow a right-leaning person to come in, but at the same time, they got to protect them both, right? Because what happens is you never hear the Republicans going to the left-leaning and causing riots and beating on the car and trying to steal their stuff. But when the right person comes in, you have the left people coming and trying to steal their stuff and beat their car and run them out of town. So the university needs to be held responsible. If you are going to go down this road, you have to allow both sides to do it, but you have to protect both when they're there. You cannot allow that to happen. And so when you look at Charlie Kirk, and everybody's been watching the reels, what he was doing was amazing on college campuses. And he was changing minds, not through, people are saying hate talk. It wasn't hatred. It was very reasonable, very logical. He was arguing the facts and allowed them to speak. And he knew what they were going to say before they said it. And he knew what their arguments were going to be, because when you go around and talk to enough people, that's what you hear all the time. But he was making such an impact. And I think you saw it in the presidential years as well with those younger generations. And I think now you see the younger generations, there's a lot of them who are now talking about faith and God and other things because of Turning Point coming in on campus.
So how do we hold some of these universities, especially ones that are public, accountable for some of these actions? I mean, I know a lot of us here in Murfreesboro are grateful that in the past couple of weeks, our own mayor has said, okay, enough's enough. Like, we need new leadership at MTSU. But that goes back to Board of Trustees, which is something we were talking about before we got started, which may be a way.
But that's another way, because the Board of Trustees is now, the governor has appointments, and now both speakers have appointments. So it's kind of a different Board of Trustees all across the state. So there's an opportunity there to affect change. You obviously have change through appropriation and things that they like to have. You can affect change through that. You can affect change through Hope Scholarship, and that type of stuff. I mean, it's the same way the federal government tries to affect us in Tennessee when Biden was in. Well, what they were telling federal people who were getting federal contracts in Oak Ridge is, if you want this contract, all your employees have to be vaccinated. Otherwise, you can't get it, right? That's what the federal government tries to do to businesses. They use a capability to force that. I'm not sure we want to be that heavy-handed, but I think there should be conversations, but it should be open to both, and both should be protected and let the people make up their mind in the end.
So let's talk a little bit about accomplishments, some of the good things that have happened over the past, 7, 8, 9 years during your time in the legislature and also as speaker. Obviously, this year, Tennessee passed, landmark education reforms that prioritize outcomes, parental involvement, choice, student success. What was that like? Tell us a little bit about, the thought process behind that, why that was important to you, and obviously the governor to pass that.
Yeah, no, and that's where the governor and I initially disagreed when I was speaker and coming in 19 was on school choice. And then what changed for me, people all the time, well, you changed for whatever reason.
Sure.
What they say is never factual. The reason I switched is because I was watching COVID and school boards and parents going to school boards. And parents were going in trying to express concern about the social distancing, the masks in the classroom. And then all of a sudden, when they sent them home, they were realizing, well, this is what they're working on in the classroom. So they went back again and said, why are you all teaching this? Why these books are here? And started questioning. And the school boards just totally dismissed them. Almost in every community, the school boards totally dismissed them. And so the question you have to ask yourself is why?
Yeah.
Because they know they have a 90 to 95% monopoly. They know that those parents really have no other options, right? They can't afford private school, or maybe they can't do this or that. And so they know that very little are ever going to leave. So realistically, they don't have to listen to the parents. And to your point on higher education, what do they listen to a lot of times? So they listen to the money aspect of it, right? And so that's one aspect, which is if you're not going to listen to the parents, give the parents the capability to make the best decision for their child, right? That's the first thing. And so COVID's what changed me in that. If the school boards really aren't going to listen to the parents and the parents don't have any other options, what options can they have? Charter schools are one option. School choice is another. But you should allow the parent to make that best decision for their child. And they may be somewhere, everybody wants to focus on academics. It's not always about academics. They may need they may have dyslexia and they may need something different, or they don't fit in that school system. Maybe they're being bullied. There's a lot of different things. It could be the best school, but still not the right fit. So it's not always about academics. But we should allow the parents to keep their money and use it in education the best that they can. Because how you change lives is through education. And so they need to have the opportunity to have a quality education. If they're not providing it, then they should go somewhere else. And when you look at, say, Shelby County schools, which are the worst in our state, for the life of me, it's hard for me to figure out why the Democrat Party in Shelby County is opposed to allowing parents who are Democrats to have the opportunity to give their child something different.
Yeah.
And get them out of a bad situation. And so really it's more about empowering the parents, allowing them to make those decisions, but it also will hold the school boards accountable where they're going to have to listen to the parents. And then all of a sudden, what just happened? If you have charter schools, school choice, and then public schools, all those individuals or all those entities are competing for that student. So if you're competing for that student, you have to meet the needs of that student. Right? And so all of a sudden what has to happen is everybody has to improve. If I'm the only restaurant in town, I don't care if I'm meeting your needs or not. You can meet them at home or in the restaurant. But now if I have 5, I'm having to compete with all 5. And I'm going to have to raise my level so that you want to come to me and not the other 4. It's just the way that the world works, and that's the way business is. And if you're not providing a service, Uber, taxis, Airbnb, hotels, you can look at the business sector. Education's no different.
Yeah, there's no doubt that choice options should increase quality.
Mm-hmm. No, they
and
will.
So that,
absolutely.
You know,
they will.
so that's always kind of been my perspective on it. Is the more choices that people have in the marketplace, it should drive quality. And so, you know, that's you know, to a T. I think that resonates more with conservatives and even some that kind of were on the fence. It's like, well, you're a free market person with everything else. Why can't we have a free marketplace when it comes to education?
I mean, look, the latest poll that came out. So once you go through that door and open that door, there's a poll that came out a few months ago, Republicans favor school choice now, expanding school choice in Tennessee. Independents favor expanding school choice in Tennessee, and Democrats favor expanding school choice in Tennessee, because now they're all seeing, hey, I need to have an opportunity. I may not take it, but why should I be limited in my ability to find the best opportunity for my child?
And when you don't have competition, you really stifle innovation.
Yeah.
There's no reason for a school to sit back and say, how can we do this better? How can we educate kids? You know, now we're living in a society of AI and technology. How do we implement those cutting edge ideas if we don't have any competition, if we don't have anyone else challenging us? And from a opportunity for a state to grow and economic development, if your education system is not teaching those students how to be prepared for the future, it doesn't, you know, our state's only going to diminish. And so I applaud you. That's why I think education reform is so important as our state continues to grow.
Well, I think there's more that we can do for innovation too, and a couple of things that we're gonna talk about. But and I'll tell them out here in a second. But to your point, is the best way to keep someone out of prison is a quality education. The best way to change someone's life is through a quality education that gets them a quality job. That's why what Governor Lee has done for vocational education and the $1 billion he's invested to build those will be transformational for our state. It really will. But there's some couple of things that we're working on to try to incorporate next year, and we're working with the State Board of Education. I was on phone calls today on the way down here. One is should teachers only have to have a bachelor's degree, right? Should all teachers have to have a bachelor's degree? Or could we set up a pipeline where they go through a junior college that's designed for the classroom, that's for certain grades, where they're really in tune with what they need to do in those grades? And then they go get their bachelor's after that. But can we get more teachers that way? Can we churn out more? Would that help us? Because junior colleges are in the rural areas, or the colleges are in the bigger cities, and the junior colleges is in the smaller cities. So should we continue to be doing just bachelor degree teachers, or should we look at trying to set it up like a LPN, RN, nurse practitioner? They all do something a little different. You can't be an LPN and do what a nurse practitioner does, right? There's limitations. So that's one thing to look at. The second thing is, and some people are going to be shocked by this, but you kind of have to think about it, is we know that we're very low proficiency in the state in reading and math, right? And so the other thing that I do know is in a classroom, in a third grade classroom, there may be, in a group of 20 people or 18 people, 3 to 5 different skills or different levels that they're at, because some are a little bit more advanced than others and some are having a hard time than others. How do we have the teacher teach to that many different skill levels without affecting one or the other more adversely, right? And so why are we continue to teach reading and math based on the grade? Why not put them in the classroom? And so from 9 to 10 every day in that school, this is reading. And wherever your skill level is, now you're lumped with your skill level, not with your grade, which is a change, because parents have to understand, well, my second grade may be with the fourth, but your fourth may be with the second. But should we change how we look at that? There's data that shows that states or that cities that have done that are hugely successful. And because you're providing more time with those skill sets, you're not having to divide your time. And so I think there's things that we can do to innovate. Government's very bad about innovation. And so you a lot of times you have to think outside the box, and you have to do things to look at it. I think there's things that we can do to be successful, but people are going to recoil at first, and then you kind of have to talk it through and work it out.
I know you all have worked really hard at trying to incentivize people to go into the path of being educators. You've worked on salaries, trying to get the pay up. I was looking at some statistics this week on MTSU's graduation rate, specifically in their College of Education program. In 2014 and 2015 school year, counting both the undergraduate and graduate program, they had 424 students that graduated from either undergrad or grad. In 2023 to 2024, which is the most recent statistics, that number has dropped down to 276. So not quite half, but we're getting there. And so how do we begin to push people, getting people interested in getting back into educational fields so that we have those teachers available as our population continues to grow, to be able to have quality people that are ready to go into these school systems and teach?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you look historically. I remember I was talking to a lot of people. As I said, both my parents were teachers. You talk to people who were born in the 50s and 60s, and they're like, back then there's only a few professions that women went into at that time. Teaching was one of them, but now they go into all these. And I went to LMU Medical School. There are more women in their OT program, PT program, dental program, right? And so there's more opportunities now for everybody, not just women, but for everybody. And so the more opportunities means there's more things you're competing with to try to get them to become teachers. I think the other thing is, I think salary is one of them, right? I think the second thing is, in most fields, your supervisor has your back. We have to make sure that we protect the teachers and have their back, because when a parent gets a bad grade, they're coming in to see the teacher. Well, they need to know that their principal and their school system supports them, right, in that endeavor. And if they don't, what happens? You have morale go down, right? So I think that's another aspect of it, of trying to do that. I think also, if you're going to a 4-year, that's my point earlier, if you're going to a 4-year school and you're going to incur debt, where you rather incur debt for? Going to dental school, or would you rather incur debt for engineering or teacher or nursing, right? And how much is that debt? That's why I think if we reshape it and we're looking at junior colleges, they can come out of junior college with no debt, a very good job, close to home, and they're a lot better off, right? And so I think that kind of changed the parameters on how to think about that as well. But also, I mean, I just think there's more opportunities. And so you're competing with more. And a lot of people will say, well, it's morale this and it's this. I think there's just more opportunities for people to go into different fields than maybe 40 years ago, obviously. And so we have to continue to compete with that. But I will say the biggest thing that we can do to ensure our success, it's K through 12 education. And we have to be able to have students who can think logically, independent, understand facts, search out facts, look at the data and make the decision for themselves, not have government try to tell them what to do, what not to do. Trust the government, trust me. They need to not trust anybody, but trust and verify that information is correct, which is a whole nother problem that we're seeing with AI and social media and news.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. Well, we could probably sit here and talk about just education in general all day long, but really want to shift gears a little bit and talk a lot about, you've really championed over the past several legislative sessions and years criminal justice reform, most notably through your Truth in Sentencing Act, which ensures that violent offenders serve 100% of their court-imposed sentence without early release.
Right.
So talk a little bit about what inspired that legislation and how you believe it's impacting public safety in Tennessee.
Well, I think it's made a difference, right? Violent crime is down. I think that what we were told when we were trying to pass it from these soft-on crime groups is, criminals don't look at sentencing laws. I'm like, oh, yeah, they do. Yes, they do. They understand that if it takes 4 times to get convicted of something before I serve 50%, they already know how much time they're going to do. They know what the bail system's like. They know what it's like. They understand that completely. And so I look at it from the standpoint of trying to raise children. So as you're growing up, if you think about your parents, hopefully there was different consequences for different actions, right? If you let's say that you broke curfew, right? That might be one consequence, and you understand what that is. So you're weighing, and criminals weigh, what's the consequence with what I can get away with,
if
right?
I do it again.
Yes, right? Then there's the thing of, well, if you push your mom up against a wall, what's that consequence? And you're going to weigh that. And I would hope that your parents would be a vastly different consequence. But what happened if you put your hands on your mom and it was the same consequence as breaking curfew? That's what we had in Tennessee under our criminal code. We were not tough on violent criminals at all. They were serving 30% of the most violent crimes except first-degree murder, and it was just not tough. Second-degree murder, you might get out after 4 or 5 years. Well, that's ridiculous. And so what we looked at is saying, look, criminals don't start violent. Most of the time, the vast majority don't start violent. They build up misdemeanors and they work their way up. But there should be a level once you cross that place.
Yeah.
It's 100%. There's no questions. It's so heinous. It's so bad. You should spend every single day in there. That's just the way it goes. And then we're going to back off. And then we have some at 85% and some at others. So it came about from watching our violent crime numbers going up, realizing that how soft we were, that the most violent were treated almost like they were committing a lower grade felony or a misdemeanor. And there was no ramification. So we came out with Truth in Sentencing was one of the first things. It was a battle. We got it through. How Democrats vote against it, still don't understand it. Because either you're going to protect the criminals or protect the victims. And what we do know with every criminal that gets charged with a felony, they've committed 4 or 5 charges before, 4 or 5 things before that no one ever caught. So there's a path of victims lying in the background. And so you can't protect both. I would side with the victims. Then we came out, we took on bail this year, did a lot of bail reform. There's a lot of misinformation about bail and what people think. They think the 10% was a hard 10%. No, the bail company could get you out for 1%. They can get you out for $100. They can get you out on a payment plan. And you're wondering why people get out faster than it takes the law enforcement officer to finish the paperwork, right? Yeah. And so the whole system was messed up. And so we're trying to redesign the system to protect victims.
Well, at the same time, we're seeing Memphis and the situation that Memphis is in. The federal government has now been brought in, and it's not just the National Guard; it's the full efforts of the federal government, all the way to the Department of War. I was in Washington D.C. last week, and I was there also there in January and April, and last week was different than when I was there earlier this year, and it's making a difference. And I would just happen to be watching the local news. And the citizens there living in Washington, D.C. say it's great. I don't have to worry about going outside and being mugged or being a victim of a crime. And we should not have any city in America that people have to worry about being victims of a crime by walking out your door. And so it just makes sense that we would be hard on crime in the state. So thank you for doing that. My question, though, is how do we start to enforce these crimes? I think that's been one of the issues we've seen in Memphis specifically, is just the lack of will for our justice system to enforce these crimes or enforce these laws.
Yeah. Well, I think, look, you can have a great sheriff or a great police chief, but if you don't have good judges, it really doesn't matter. If you have those two that are great, but you have a DA who's unwilling to prosecute, that doesn't work. So it can break down at any 1-3 points. And so you have to be very strong. And people need to understand that how they vote for these people is directly impacting their communities, right? And so there has to be a thing there. Whether you're Democrat, Republican, you should be tough on crime, right? I think the other thing is if you want to talk about Memphis in particular, it all started in COVID. That's where Memphis crime really took off, is in COVID. It was always a little high, but in COVID got really high. Why? Because they shut down their schools. So what happened when they shut down their schools? All these juveniles were where? At home. Guess what they got involved in? Gangs. Guess how many gangs are in Memphis now? Over 100. Guess the adults, we also had to fix juvenile crime legislation for blending sentencing, because the juvenile was so lax that they would recruit the juvenile to do the crimes for the adult, knowing that they would never really ever serve any time, right? Because of the way it was. And so the whole problem that we're dealing with now was the consequence of the school system shutting down schools. And I think a lot of times people outside that they don't see that narrative. They just think, well, these people moved in. Well, no, they recruited during that time. And so now you have all these gangs. And so the nice thing is if the National Guard will come in, the federal resources come in, and I think in the first couple of days, they've already arrested 100 criminals. Like, it's going to be hugely successful. Now you got the county saying our jail's not big enough. Well, that sounds like a county problem to me, right? I understand that, but let's figure this out. If you've been doing your job for the last 10 years, we wouldn't be in this situation, right? And so I think to that point is you have to understand what caused it and how to root it out. And so we're going to continue to work on that. I think we're looking at options next year on how that looks, maybe with other judges trying to help out in there, having someone watch over the current DA, make sure that they're prosecuting and doing what they need to do. But, at the end of the day, to your point, people should feel safe. And so once again, there's a disconnect. We talk about disconnect in the inner cities between school choice, where the parents want it, and the Democrats don't want it, right? The elected officials. Same thing here. Democrat elected officials saying, we don't need a National Guard here. We don't need here. You go on the street and you've seen all these videos, these people are like, no, I think we do. So there's a disconnect. But the problem is, until these individuals decide that these individuals no longer represent their interests, you're going to be held back to a certain degree. So it also goes back to elections.
Well, speaking of elections, that was a great segue. Did you know that was coming? So looking ahead, obviously we're coming up on a gubernatorial election year, but also with that, obviously, Governor Lee's last legislative session, you've kind of alluded to just a few things here and there as far as legislative priorities. So what might be some of those things that you're looking to tackle this next session, either solely or with the governor, that you could kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it's been great working with the governor. We have a conversation with him here in a week and a half about what he's looking to do. So we'll wait to see what he wants. Look, I think on the criminal justice, we're looking at a 3 strikes law. We think that we need a 3 strikes law, meaning that, but it also will go down to the misdemeanor level. And so if you create a misdemeanor in our state, as certain misdemeanors, you might get a third or a fourth of a strike. And so it takes 3 to 4 of those, which means you committed multiple crimes to get 1 strike. If it's a violent crime, non-truth in sentencing, 100%, it might be a half a strike. If it's a 100% truth in sentencing, it might be a full strike. And trying to do something to really say you've had to commit 7 to 10 crimes before you ever get to the 3rd strike. It's just not 3. So you've had multiple opportunities. And so we're trying to look at the third strike policy, which I think will be effective, working with different groups on that, trying to get it right. I think it will be very beneficial for our state. I think if you look at education, we talked about some education. I think healthcare, we're looking at some CON reform, long-term, trying to open up that market a little bit, see what that may look like. I think there's a couple things that we can do. We don't want to do the whole thing. I think there's a couple opportunities there. And then you're always going to have members who are kind coming up with ideas that you hear out in the community on what they want to do. But I'm sure it will be interesting. I think that the thing is people want to sit here and say, oh, this General Assembly is not conservative and they're not this. Well, when you compare us to other states, we are the most conservative General Assembly in America. We're also one of the most conservative states in America. We are the General Assembly, Tennessee is the #1 federalism state in America, which people don't see. But the thing is, that's not the things that you see, because you have so much chaos out here between like the crime and the Memphis and the Tennessee 3 and others, that we're doing a lot of great stuff. And we're positioning our state for long-term success.
Well, and I can validate that. You know, I had the opportunity to work in 3 other states in a previous role, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. From 2019 to 2022, roughly, and it was always interesting sitting in those legislative meetings. The state that they almost always mentioned that they were talking about was Tennessee. And, that's 100% true, that we have become kind of a beacon and an example for so many other states. Tennessee did this, and they did that. And, there's some states that still have an state income tax.
Right.
And so they're looking at us. And so you're 100% right that I think a lot of people take that for granted, the fact that we have come so far in the past 10 years.
We are. I mean, look, in 15 years, our state's better positioned than the previous 100 under Democrat control. That's just to be honest with you. Yeah. We're better off in every aspect. We put more money in education, increased teacher salaries. Democrats don't want to say that, but we have. And I think, too, a lot of times what happens is people will look at the budget. And so what I have learned being in politics is you have individuals or certain groups that will give you half fact and half false narrative. And you have to dig through, like we're saying, you need to debate it. And so what they'll say is, Tennessee's budget has doubled under Republican control. Doubled. Look how much spending they're doing, right? Okay. So let's break that down a little bit. Okay. So the fact is, yes, it has doubled, right? But there's a lot of federal money in it because of the Biden years. That's going to go down. So it's going to be less than doubled. And then when you put money in the rainy day fund, our savings account, which is now over $2 billion, it started under Governor Haslam like at $100 million. Guess what that is? That's called spending. That's in the budget every year. So if I'm putting money in our savings account, you're going to ding us for spending? Like, that's just being conservative and making sure that we have the means if something happens. So you have to look at that. The other thing is, so then you look at the budget and you say, well, where would the budget be if we did no other thing else other than rate of inflation?
Yeah.
And then you have to remember that rate of inflation compounds. So if it's 2% this year and it's 2% next year, it's the 100 plus 2% for the next 2%. It's just not like it's 30%, so I'm going to take this number and put in 130%. That's not how it works. And so when you take all that into account, right, and you can leave in the rainy day fund and you can leave in the stimulus money that's still over $1.5 billion, even with all that in there, our budget has increased by the rate of inflation plus less than 2%. Think about it. And what have we done at that time? We've cut $5 billion in taxes, right? We have put more money in education, more money in roads, more money in higher education to build those out to get more people. And you've seen University of Tennessee and other schools, people are flocking here. And so all of a sudden you're saying, actually, we're doing a pretty good job. But then you don't even take into account that we have 400,000 more workers than we did 15 years ago. So there's more people working in Tennessee. And then the amount of just the people here, which is 1 million more people, and then the amount of traffic and the amount of people who are coming here through tourism. So when you account for all that, guess what you need more of? You got to fix your roads more. You're going to have to do more infrastructure. That's more water. It's more sewer to put out in the local communities. So there's a lot of extra costs when all these new people are coming in, right? And so I'm not even factoring in the growth rate of population and everything. And so when you look at, we are a very conservative state. And so people want to try to ding you and put you in a niche, but then you tell the rest of the story and people are like, oh, no, we are really good budget-wise.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to put a graph together and just show that something's...
Well, it is. And at least taxed, yeah. Right? State in America, yeah. Most people, biggest tourism. Look,
exactly.
And we have been able to give tax cuts because we take in so much tourism dollars. We get over $3 billion of tourism revenue. Think about it, $3 billion in tourism revenue. And we've given $5 billion in tax cuts. So why would we not continue to promote tourism so that we can keep our citizens the lowest tax people in America? It makes perfect sense. You don't want to be California. You don't want to be New York.
Well, you mentioned our growth, which I think is important. And here in Rutherford County, it's specifically important. If we're going to continue to move with the same trajectory with conservative values, we're seeing a lot of influx of new people with new ideas, and not all of them are very conservative. And so I think that's one of the things here at the Rutherford County GOP. We're constantly trying to make sure that we're pushing our conservative values so that we don't lose that stronghold that we've had here for so long. As you're looking at upcoming elections and opportunities to pick up seats, lose seats, what do we do here in Rutherford County to make sure that we continue to bring in elected officials?
Look, you got to keep building your local party, right? I think if we allow our local party to be, you have to be these 10 things and anything else, you're not a Republican, you're gonna start having problems. And what I tell people is when you go back, pick a decade before 2010, so say 1990, 1980, 1970, all Democrat controlled. How did we get to be Republicans in the state? How do we become a Republican red state in a supermajority red state in Tennessee? Was it because we had 2 million people move in that circumvented the votes of the Democrats who were here? No. What happened is the Southern Democrats all of a sudden said the Democrat Party no longer represents my interest. They are no longer what I'm aligned with, fiscally or socially or whatever it may be. And so they started looking for somewhere to go. Guess where they went? They started voting Republican. And they start voting Republican first at the national level, then it bleeds to the state level, and then it bleeds to the local. You can see it in every state, in every county that's red. They come in at the end of it. And so in order for us to continue, we have to realize that it's better to have a Republican in elected office than a Democrat, in my opinion. And so we need to continue to build our party. We need to pull people into our party. And they may have opposing views, but they may never heard your view. They may come from a state where they think they're a conservative, and we're like, well, that's more like a moderate, and we automatically discount them. But maybe they never heard the conservative message and what's working here. I would assume they're probably at least somewhat Ronald Reagan-esque to a certain degree. But to get to the point, Donald Trump would never be president, Ronald Reagan would never have been president if we would have closed primaries. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but if you're going to say you had to vote in so many, they would never qualify to be a Republican at all, right? And so we have to be the party where we want people to come in. We want you to be Republican. We want to get you to be conservative. And so we need to be more open, not closed, and trying to put everybody in the same box.
Well, one thing, as we transition to a new governor, I'm a little curious what your thoughts are, because you're working with the governor all the time. What do you think what are the skills and the know-how that our next governor needs to have? I'm not asking you to pick a governor, but what are the things what are the characteristics that a governor needs to have to be prepared to continue to lead our state in the way we've been going?
Well, one, I think there needs to be a vision, right? I'm not going to get in details what their vision is, but they need to have a vision of where they want to go, right? You can't lead if you don't know where to go, and you can't know where to go if you don't talk to people. That's the beauty of campaigns. Campaigns should give you the vision of where you want to go, and at some point here by March of next year, there should be a vision of this is what we want to do. Sometimes it's political, a lot of times it's policy, a lot of times it's different things, but where do we want to lead? Where do we want to go? You look at Governor Haslam when he came in, he wanted to get the budget straight. He wanted to make it reduce business regulations. He wanted to set us up as a pro-business state. Very good job at that. Got us into the point where now we put money in education, but he got us to a point where we were able to sustain ourselves. At least we weren't behind the 8 ball. Governor Lee came in with, I want to improve education through school choice. I want to do vocational schools. I want to reduce the number of distressed counties in our state. All great things that he has achieved. So they all come in with a vision. And so hopefully this campaign will tell us where the next person that wants to be governor, what that vision is, and we can take a look at it and say, that's great. And as you work on it, what happens to that vision is people come in, because we would never guess criminal justice 5-10 years ago, right? It would never have been on our plate, or some healthcare reforms, right? And so all of a sudden, your vision can expand, but you got to know where you want to go, or we're never going to achieve it.
Well, Speaker, thank you for being here today. Where can folks kind of follow you and keep in touch with your office?
Yeah, I mean, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. They can go to the state website to find us. We have a newsletter where if you want to sign up for it, we have a lot of people. We send out newsletter updates and what that looks like. And so, look, it's all about allowing people to get the information and make up their mind themselves. And one of the things is that you mentioned earlier, you go to other states and they say, man, Tennessee's doing some great stuff. What we want to do. The funny thing is we get a lot of times from people say, hey, you need to do what Florida just did. And you're like, well, we did that 2 years ago. The difference is in Tennessee, we don't run it up the flagpole. We don't say we're the champions of this. Sometimes it gets to court case, and some of the stuff like the transgender stuff was us, and we won that court case. But a lot of times we do the stuff because we're already moving in that direction, and others come along after, and then they act like they're the champion of it when it really was Tennessee that started the process.
Well, Speaker, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for championing conservative values. It's making a world of difference in our community. It's making a difference for my kids and their future generation here in our state. And so thanks for the time you spent. If you've liked this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. If you've got a question about something we talked today, we would love to interact with you on our social media channels. If you will continue to watch this channel, we'll continue to bring out new content for you. Thanks for joining us today.